We continue our reflections on the Gospels during the octave of Easter, remembering that it is one long story of the appearance of Jesus to the disciples. This is a reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. The disciples of Jesus recounted what had taken place along the way and how they had come to recognize him in the breaking of bread. While they were still speaking about this, he stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." But they were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. And then he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do questions arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, because a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you can see I have." And as he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While they were still incredulous for joy and were amazed, he asked them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of baked fish. He took it and ate it in front of them. He said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and in the prophets and Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Christ would suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance for the forgiveness of sins would be preached in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things." We can imagine the disciples on the evening of the resurrection in the room in which they were enclosed, and out of fear for the Jews, but also out of a great sense of guilt and shame. After all, they had run at a time that Jesus was experiencing his passion. They were not present at the foot of the cross like the faithful women and the beloved disciple. And we can imagine them filled with the kind of guilt that Peter himself would have had because he had denied Jesus 3 times. In a way, they had all done that. And the first words that Jesus comes to give to them as he appears is, "Peace be with you." And we remember that shalom itself means that you are at one with all of creation, with one another, with God. There's a sense of at one-ment. And so it's a sign of reconciliation. It's a sign of forgiveness. It's a sign that the past is past and that Jesus is moving forward with his disciples. We can reflect today on those times when we may have experienced shame or guilt, or the fact that we had hurt others very deeply, and how the Lord has come to forgive us and has relieved our shame and our guilt as well, has helped us to move forward. Another aspect of this particular gospel is that Jesus does show his disciples his wounds, so that there's a recognition that there's still a connection between Jesus' passion and his death and resurrection itself. After all, that will be the good news that the disciples will witness to, Jesus' death and his resurrection. And you can't talk about one without the other. And that would all be part of their witness of the good news of Jesus Christ. So, as Jesus appears to them, he does so in a glorified way. At first, they don't recognize him. That's part of the pattern that we see in all of the stories, that as Jesus appears, at first they don't recognize him, that Jesus has to open their eyes and help them to come to realization of his presence. Just as that happens in our lives too. It's often, again, the initiative of the Lord that helps us to recognize how he is present in our own lives. And we too need to be as open as we possibly can to those ways in which the Lord comes to us. So that's another thing to reflect on today as we have heard this gospel. When is it that we have encountered the Lord? How has he opened our eyes to his presence?